The CEO called my personal cell at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening, breathing like a man who had just watched his empire catch fire. "Leonard," he said, "what will it take?" I let the silence sit for a second before I answered. Outside my window, the yard had gone dark. My cat was asleep on the porch. My whiskey glass was still half full. And somewhere across the city, every financial dashboard inside Hartwell Manufacturing was showing the same message: authorization failure. Contact system administrator. The system administrator was still me, not Tyler Bradshaw. The 33-year-old MBA who had smiled at me beside a coffee station 4 days earlier and called my missing bonus a policy shift. Not the CFO, who had just spent 2 hours telling a boardroom full of people this was a temporary vendor glitch. Me, the quiet 60-year-old engineer they had tried to erase. I took a slow sip of whiskey and thought about everything it had cost to get here. Before I tell you how it ended, let me tell you how it started. 3 weeks before that phone call, champagne was flowing inside Hartwell Manufacturing's main conference room. The ERP migration had gone live without a single hour of downtime. 3 years of work. Payroll. Inventory. Financial reporting. Board. Dashboards. 2. Accounts payable. Vendor tracking. Customer credit analysis. And real-time executive summaries, all running clean on a single integrated platform. People were toasting leadership, praising vision, clapping for Tyler Bradshaw, who had given a 15-minute speech about digital transformation and used the word innovative 11 times. I counted. I stood near the doorway with a paper cup of bad coffee, watching people celebrate a system they could not explain. Every integration they were cheering had been designed by me. Every fragile COBOL process nobody else was willing to touch had been rebuilt by me. Every emergency call at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night had been answered by me. The 3 years of weekends, the missed dinners, the cold birthday cakes my wife had left on the counter because I was still at the office. All of that was invisible in Tyler's speech. My name was not mentioned once. I told myself it did not matter. I had spent 27 years at Hartwell without needing a round of applause. I was the kind of engineer who measured success by systems that never failed, not by being called innovative in a conference room. But when Tyler found me by the coffee station 20 minutes later, I understood that being invisible was not the problem. Being disposable was. "Len." "Hey. Got a second," he said, already smiling like the conversation was finished before it started. I set my cup down. "What is it?" He glanced over his shoulder, then lowered his voice like he was doing me a courtesy. "So, about your bonus. Corporate is tightening post-project payouts. New policy shift. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. I looked at him for a moment. The champagne was still audible through the conference room glass. People were laughing. The CFO had his arm around the IT director, saying something that made everyone nearby smile. My contract had a specific performance bonus tied to the successful completion of this migration. We had discussed it. HR had confirmed it. Tyler himself had referenced it in writing 18 months earlier, when I had pushed back on a particularly brutal stretch of 16-hour days. He was now standing in front of me with champagne foam still on his sleeve, telling me it was gone. "Got it," I said. Tyler nodded like I had just agreed to something reasonable and walked back toward the celebration. I stood there another minute, watching the room, watching people laugh and clink glasses and take photos for LinkedIn. I did not feel rage. I felt something quieter. Clarity. After 27 years, Hartwell had decided I was disposable. They were about to learn how expensive that decision was. There was one thing Tyler had never read. 3 years earlier, before the ERP migration had even been approved, Hartwell's executive team had been seriously considering outsourcing the entire project to a consulting firm based in Dallas. They had a good pitch, a fast timeline, and a price tag that looked attractive to people who had never seen what happened when you handed someone unfamiliar with 20 years of custom COBOL the keys to a running financial system. I had raised objections through the proper channels. I had written memos. I had requested meetings. I had explained, calmly and in detail, that Hartwell's infrastructure was not a standard ERP environment. It had been customized layer by layer over 2 decades. The new platform would need to integrate with processes that were older than most of the people in the room. And the only person at Hartwell who understood those integrations was me. Some of those objections were heard. Most were not. So when the vendor contract came through for final review, I read every page carefully. Not because I was looking for leverage, because I had spent 2 decades watching companies assume technology problems could be solved by people who had never touched the actual system. And I had cleaned up enough of those disasters to know what the warning signs looked like. On page 47, in Appendix C, I proposed one addition to Clause 8. It was a single sentence. It said that if the designated principal architect was removed from active compensated status for more than 96 hours, the platform license would become null and void. Effective immediately. All access rights and certifications would terminate until the breach was cured. My name was listed as the designated principal architect. The vendor agreed without much discussion. The ERP was not a standard installation, and they knew it. The custom integrations linking Hartwell's legacy COBOL processes to the new platform were unusual enough that they were genuinely concerned about ongoing support. Having a certified internal architect on active status protected them as much as it protected me. Hartwell's legal team reviewed the contract. They approved it. Tyler's predecessor signed it. Nobody on the executive floor read page 47. That was their first mistake. When Tyler smiled at me that evening and called my bonus a policy shift, he had not just broken a promise. He had started a 96-hour clock. I went home that night, sat at the kitchen table after my wife had gone to bed, and opened the executed vendor agreement on my laptop. Appendix C, Clause 8, Subsection 2. I read it twice. Then I opened a new email addressed to Patricia Morrison in Hartwell's legal department. Patricia was the CEO's niece, which in another company might have meant she was insulated from real work. At Hartwell, it meant the opposite. Patricia had walked into that role knowing everyone was waiting for her to fail. So she had become the most thorough attorney in the building. She read contracts the way other people read threats. She understood that one ignored sentence could cost a company more than a failed quarter. I chose her because she would not bury this. She would not take it to Tyler first and give him a chance to spin it. She would read it, understand it, and take it to the people who needed to know. The email was 4 sentences. I wrote that I wanted to flag a potential compliance concern related to the ERP vendor agreement. I noted that a recent compensation decision might create an issue under Appendix C. Clause 8. Subsection 2. I attached the full contract and pointed her to page 47. Then I said I was happy to discuss further if she had questions. No threats. No demands. No angry paragraph about the launch party or Tyler's smile. Just information. Clean. Factual. And impossible to ignore. I hit send at 11:47 and went to bed. The read receipt appeared the next morning at 7:22. Then nothing. No reply. No phone call. No forwarded email finding its way back to me through the grapevine. Just silence. But I knew Patricia. Somewhere upstairs. She was on page 47. She was reading it the same way I had read it. Slowly. Twice. And then a third time just to confirm that the words meant what she thought they meant. She understood what I had sent her. Now she had to decide what to do with it. I spent that day doing something nobody on the executive floor would have expected from someone who had just been cut. I prepared. Not to sabotage. Not to plant anything in the system or change any credentials or leave hidden landmines in code that only I could find. I had too much respect for what I had built and too much concern for the thousands of Hartwell employees whose paychecks depended on it running cleanly. I was not going to hurt them to hurt Tyler. But if Hartwell was going to argue that my value was a technicality, I wanted a precise record of exactly what that technicality held together. I opened a spreadsheet and started working. Financial close procedures. Board reporting dashboards. Payroll calculation engine. inventory synchronization, accounts payable automation, customer credit scoring, vendor performance tracking, audit trail generation, data warehouse feeds, tax reporting integrations, insurance compliance exports. Every system, every dependency, every process that touched the ERP license. By lunch, I had listed 63 critical integrations. By the end of the day, 81. Each one had the same note beside it: license breach stops this. Some would fail within hours. Others had cached data that would hold for a day or two before the numbers went stale and unusable. Payroll had the shortest window. The calculation engine pulled live data from the ERP on a rolling basis. If the license invalidated, the cached data would expire in roughly 72 hours. And after that, Hartwell could not process payroll. Not a minor inconvenience. Not a technical headache. A legal emergency. I saved the spreadsheet to my personal drive, closed my laptop, and went home for dinner on time for the first time in 3 weeks. My wife looked up from the stove when I walked in. "You're early." "I had a good day," I said. She gave me a look that said she did not quite believe me but was willing to enjoy the surprise. I set the table and did not mention any of it. Monday morning, the icing out began. I arrived at my usual time, made coffee, and sat at my desk. At 9:47, the notification came I had been removed from the digital transformation Slack channel. No message. No explanation. Just a gray notification where the channel used to be. 10 minutes later, the weekly technical sync disappeared from my calendar. The meeting where architecture decisions got made and integration problems got surfaced, and the team working on the system I had built actually talked to each other. I sat back in my chair and looked at the empty space where the meeting invitation had been. They thought they were squeezing me out. They thought that if they made me feel small enough, invisible enough, unnecessary enough, I would clean out my desk quietly and let them avoid the awkwardness of a real conversation. But all they had really done was confirm the breach was intentional, which meant the 96-hour clock was no longer theoretical. It was running. I spent that week doing my actual job, answering the questions I was still technically asked to answer, documenting what I was asked to document, attending the meetings I was still invited to, which were fewer every day. I did not lock anyone out. I did not delete any files. I did not change a single password or alter a single process. What I stopped doing was quietly absorbing the small panic calls that kept a system running smoothly. The informal messages from junior engineers saying, "Hey, Leonard, can you just look at this for a second?" The early morning checks nobody had asked me to do, but that I had done anyway, because I cared about whether the system worked. I simply stopped volunteering what they had decided I was not worth paying for. The system did not need me to sabotage it. It needed me to stop protecting it. And that was a very different thing. At 11:43 on Monday night, the 96 hours ended. There was no explosion, no flashing warning, no dramatic server room alarm screaming into the dark. The vendor's compliance system ran its automated check, found that the designated principal architect was no longer in active compensated status, confirmed the breach had exceeded the contractual window, and invalidated the license. Quietly, automatically, exactly the way the contract said it would. Hartwell did not die loudly. It simply stopped being authorized. Tuesday morning smelled like bad coffee, and the particular kind of silence that only exists right before people realize something has gone very wrong. The first sign came before 7 o'clock, when the CFO's automated daily report never arrived. No attachment, no dashboard, no neat summary of overnight financials waiting in his inbox. By 8, the help desk phones were lighting up across every department. Finance could not close their morning reports. Accounts payable could not move money. Inventory screens had gone blank. Sales could not confirm order status or pull customer credit information. On every executive dashboard, the same 2 lines. Authorization failure. Contact system administrator. I sat at my desk with coffee in my chipped mug. watching executives move through the hallway with the fast, directionless energy of people who do not yet know what is wrong but understand that something is. Nobody looked at the quiet man in the corner. Not yet. At 8:17, the vendor sent the formal notification that ended every hope Tyler had of calling this a network issue. License invalid due to breach of contract. Clause C. 8. Subsection 2. Contact designated account holder for reinstatement procedures. The designated account holder was me. That was when the room changed. People stopped refreshing their screens and hoping the number would appear. They stopped asking IT to reboot things. They stopped blaming routers and cached certificates and whatever else sounded technical enough to explain away the silence. Because the vendor had just told them, in writing, that this was not a technology problem. It was a contract problem. And the only man in the building named in that contract was the same man Tyler had offered a policy shift beside the coffee station. Tyler still tried to control the narrative. At 8:46, an all-staff email landed in everyone's inbox. Temporary vendor authentication issue. He wrote, IT is working with the provider. No action needed at this time. I read it twice. Then I set it aside and poured more coffee. Patricia Morrison replied all at 9:03. One sentence. This is a licensing breach, not a technical issue. The office went quiet in a way I had never experienced in 27 years. Keyboards slowed. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. People who had ignored me for years suddenly glanced toward my desk. The way people look at a door, they finally realize leads somewhere important. Tyler's version of events had just been corrected in writing. Company-wide. By the company's own legal counsel. At 9:30, the CEO called an emergency executive meeting. Through the glass wall of conference room A, I watched the CFO pacing with his laptop. HR sat in the corner with her phone to her ear. Tyler stood near the display screen, talking fast, using his hands more than usual, the way people do when words stop being enough. Patricia slid the contract across the table and pointed to page 47. I did not need to be in that room. I already knew what page 47 did to a person. Around noon, HR tried the solution that only HR could invent. They processed a backdated bonus, a manual adjustment with a timestamp that read 11:04 in the morning, nearly 4 hours after the vendor had already confirmed the breach in writing. They thought a number could travel backward through time. Patricia was precise about why it could not. Her email was short, company-wide, and about as gentle as a legal filing. Retroactive compensation does not resolve breach status under Clause 8. Subsection 2. Timestamped payment logs confirm violation occurred prior to cure attempt. Platform remains unlicensed. Disclosure to vendor and relevant stakeholders will proceed unless breach is formally cured per contract terms. I read it, set down my coffee, and looked out the window for a moment. There was no version of this where Tyler's story survived the afternoon. By mid-afternoon, the executive floor understood they were no longer managing an outage. They were managing a crisis with a board meeting the following morning. Hartwell's quarterly review depended on financial dashboards that were currently showing authorization errors. The numbers they needed to present to the board could not be verified because the system generating them was unlicensed. Payroll had roughly 68 hours before cash data expired. Accounts payable was frozen. The vendor had an open compliance file. Insurance wanted a formal incident report. And if any of this reached investors before it was resolved, every financial report Hartwell had generated since the migration went live could be called into question. All of it. Every dashboard. Every quarterly summary. Every board presentation built on real-time ERP data. All because Tyler Bradshaw had decided my bonus was a policy shift. At some point in the late afternoon, the CEO stopped asking whether the technology team could find a workaround. Patricia had already explained there was no workaround. The contract was specific. The breach was documented. The license would remain invalid until the breach was formally cured. And the only path to curing it ran through me. My attorney and I had prepared the proposal 2 weeks earlier, not after the launch party. Not in a panic on Monday morning when the icing out started. 2 weeks earlier. After I had read page 47 one more time and understood exactly what the contract meant. The proposal was clean. Full payment of the withheld bonus. A 40% breach penalty calculated on the original amount. A formal buyout of my principal architect designation so I could retire cleanly under a consulting arrangement if I chose to. And one written acknowledgement of my contributions to the migration, to be read at the next all-hands meeting and placed permanently in company records. At the bottom sat the number, $627,000. I sent it to Patricia and copied my attorney at 2:41 in the afternoon. I gave them 24 hours. Not to be cruel. Because Hartwell had a board meeting the next morning. Payroll expiring in less than 3 days. A vendor compliance file with my name at the center of it. And an investor base that had not yet been told the company's financial reporting system was currently operating without a valid license. Time was the one resource they had spent carelessly for years. Now they needed it. The number was precise. The withheld bonus, the breach penalty, the clause buyout, the legal fees, the cost of what it meant to walk back into a building that had tried to erase me, restore a system I had built with 3 years of my life, and do it with enough professionalism that their board meeting could still happen. Patricia confirmed receipt within 6 minutes. Understood. That was all she wrote. I closed my laptop, put my coat on, and drove downtown to a coffee shop I liked. I ordered something slow, sat by the window, watched strangers walk past like it was just another Tuesday afternoon. For them, it was. For Hartwell, it was the most expensive lesson they had ever been enrolled in. Wednesday morning, my personal cell started ringing at 6:15. Not my work phone, my personal number. The one I had given to maybe 5 people at Hartwell in 27 years. I watched the screen fill with missed calls while I made coffee. 12 calls. 8 voicemails. I scrambled eggs instead of listening to them. Fed the cat. Sat on the porch. Watched the sun come up over the neighbor's fence like I had nowhere to be. For once, Hartwell could wait on me. At 8:55, I walked through the lobby with 5 minutes to spare. Because 27 years of habits do not disappear overnight. Patricia met me near the security desk. She looked like she had been there since 6. They're ready, she said. Conference room A had more people in it than I expected. The CEO sat at the head of the table. The CFO had a folder open and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. HR sat with her hands folded. 2 board observers had joined by video call, which told me everything about how seriously the board was taking the compliance gap. Tyler stood in the back corner. Pal. Quiet. His expensive suit looked like it had been worn to sleep in. My attorney appeared on the large screen. The CEO stood when I entered. He extended his hand. I looked at it. Then I sat down, placed my notebook on the table, and looked around the room until the silence had established itself. Leonard, the CEO said carefully, we've reviewed your proposal. Then you understand. I said, there's nothing to negotiate. The CFO went first. He leaned forward and chose his words the way people do when they are more concerned about sounding reasonable than being honest. Mr. Mitchell, we are talking about over $500,000 for what amounts to a contractual technicality. Surely we can find a middle ground here. I looked at him for a moment before I answered. A technicality. He did not respond. Your financial reporting has been dark since yesterday morning. Your board dashboards cannot show a single current number. Payroll is running on cached data with less than 3 days before it fails. Accounts payable cannot process invoices. You have a board meeting tomorrow where you cannot verify the financial performance of your own company. I tapped the contract once with my finger. That is not a technicality. That is your business model asking permission to breathe. The CFO sat back and said nothing else. The CEO tried a different approach. Leonard, you've been with Hartwell for 27 years. That means something to us. It's always meant something. I let that sit for a moment. It meant something. I said, so much that my name wasn't in the launch report. So much that Tyler announced my bonus was gone while I was holding a paper cup of coffee. So much that on Monday morning, you removed me from the technical channels of the system I built. Nobody in the room spoke. You had a middle ground. I said. It was called honoring the agreement you made with me, paying what you promised, treating the person who built your infrastructure like he mattered before the lights went out. Then I turned to Tyler. He was looking at the table. His jaw was tight. You told me it wasn't personal. I said. He did not answer. You cut my bonus, removed me from the project channels, and treated 27 years of work like a line item you could quietly delete. You called it policy. The room was still. I leaned back and kept my voice even. So understand this. Tyler, what happens next is not personal either. It is business. It is policy. I assume you understand. He flinched. That was enough. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, pride finally lost to arithmetic. Patricia texted me from 3 floors up. They are going to accept. CEO is signing now. I was sitting in the same coffee shop downtown, watching the afternoon light change on the sidewalk. I had ordered a second cup about 30 minutes earlier and let it go cold while I read the newspaper. At 3:42, my attorney called. Wire is processing. Full amount. Every penny. The written acknowledgement is confirmed. CEO reads it at Friday's all hands. I said thank you and hung up. At 4:33, my bank sent the notification. Wire transfer received. $627,000. I stared at it for a while. All because they would not honor one bonus. All because a 33-year-old man in an expensive suit had decided the quiet engineer in the corner was a policy shift. I did not feel the rush of triumph I had half expected. What I felt instead was a particular kind of tired that comes from finally setting down something heavy you had been carrying for so long, you stopped noticing the weight. 27 years of loyalty. Weekends. Cold dinners. Emergency calls. An invisible work had come to this. A company paying what it owed only after losing the ability to function without me. I had won. But winning at 60 should not require watching a company go dark before they admit you mattered. I closed my phone and drove home. That evening I poured 2 fingers of whiskey, sat on the back porch, and let the yard go dark around me. That was when the CEO called. 6:47, my personal cell. I answered on the 4th ring. Leonard, he said, and his voice had lost every polished layer it usually carried. What will it take? To do what I said. To turn the system back on. We need it operational before the board meeting tomorrow morning. I let a second of silence pass. You paid to cure the breach. I said, that doesn't automatically restart the infrastructure. Someone still has to coordinate with the vendor. Confirm the compliance resolution. Rebuild the authentication layer. Test every integration. And bring each system back online safely. Pause. How long will that take? That depends on whether I'm the one doing it. He said nothing for a moment. The consulting arrangement, he said finally. $300 an hour. 20 hours a month. Like Patricia outlined. You would still be willing. I looked out at the yard. The cat had found the porch chair and was watching me with the calm indifference of something that has never once doubted its own value. I'll do it, I said, but not tonight. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., and Tyler is not in the room. Not on the calls. Not involved in any part of it. The CEO exhaled. Done. Thursday morning, I did not go to Hartwell. For the first time in years, I slept past 7, made eggs and bacon, which I usually did not bother with on a weekday, read the paper at a reasonable pace, fed the cat, sat in the kitchen and drank coffee while the sun moved slowly across the table. Somewhere across the city, Hartwell was facing its board meeting with dark dashboards and a very carefully worded explanation from the CEO about a licensing matter that had since been resolved. At 9:15, Patricia texted, CEO is reading your acknowledgement now. At 11:30. She sent a photo. My name was on the presentation screen. Leonard Mitchell, Principal Architect, 27 years of service. Led the COBOL to cloud migration, critical to the company's financial and operational infrastructure. Under the photo, Patricia wrote. He read every word. Tyler was in the room. I stared at the photo for longer than I expected. Then I set my phone down and finished my coffee. At 2:45, I drove back. Patricia met me in the lobby and led me to a smaller conference room. Not the executive suite, not the glass-walled theater where the morning had been performed. Just a functional room with a table and a whiteboard and 2 engineers I trusted. The IT director was there, and beside him, a young engineer named Marcus, who I had trained 3 years earlier. Smart kid. Asked good questions. Listened more than he talked. That alone made him better prepared than half the people in leadership positions at Hartwell. I opened my laptop, called the vendor, and walked them through the reinstatement process. Employment status verified. Compensation cured. Breach formally resolved per contract terms. Then Marcus and I rebuilt the authentication layer piece by piece. We brought the financial close procedures back first. Then the board dashboards. Then accounts payable and inventory. Then payroll synchronization. We tested each integration before moving to the next. No shortcuts. No assumptions. At 6:52, the first dashboard came back online. By 7, financial reporting was running. By 7:30, every system was live. The IT director shook my hand when the last test passed. Thank you, Leonard, he said. Genuinely, we could not have done this without you. I know, I said. It was not arrogance. It was a fact the company had just paid $627,000 to confirm. As I packed up, Patricia caught me near the elevator. You did good, she said. I did my job. She looked at me for a moment. More than that, I'm sorry for how this went. The way they treated you was wrong. I believed her. She was one of the few people in that building who understood the difference between legal compliance and basic decency. Take care of yourself, Patricia, I said. She nodded. I walked out through the lobby into the evening air. Friday afternoon, the transfer was fully cleared on my end. I moved the larger portion into Emily's college fund before I could start second-guessing myself. That had been the real point from the beginning. My granddaughter was 17, stubborn in the best possible way, already talking about engineering programs with the kind of focus that made me sure she was going to be better at this than I ever was. The bonus Hartwell had tried to take from me was going to help send her to school. That felt right. I set some aside for retirement, paid off the last small things worth paying off, and kept enough for something I had been putting off for years. A boat. Nothing extravagant. Nothing I would have to maintain like a second career. Just a reliable, sensible vessel that belonged entirely to me. After 27 years of keeping other people's systems running through the night, I wanted something I could take out on a Saturday morning without asking anyone's permission. Saturday. I took Emily for pancakes at the diner near the lake. She was halfway through her coffee when she looked at me and said, Mom told me what happened at your job. I buttered my toast slowly. Did she? They tried to cheat you out of your bonus. Yes. And you made them pay $600,000. $627,000, I said. She grinned so wide her whole face changed. That is the most grandpa thing I've ever heard. I laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that had been absent for most of the last month. Then I leaned forward. You know what the real lesson is in all of this? She put her coffee down. Get everything in writing. That is part of it. I looked at her. The rest is this. Know your value before someone else prices you low. And never let loyalty make you too trusting to protect yourself. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll remember that. I believed her. Tyler Bradshaw was not fired. That would have been too simple, and frankly too kind, because being fired at least gives a person a clear story to tell. Instead, Hartwell created a new role for him. Strategic advisor. No team under him. No system access worth mentioning. No budget to speak of. Just a title. An office in a part of the building where decisions did not happen. And a calendar full of meetings where nobody asked for his input. His father called it a transition. Patricia called it risk management. Everyone else understood what it was. A man who had built his career standing in front of other people's work was now sitting in a room where nobody needed him to stand in front of anything. Not destruction. Irrelevance. Irrelevance. That was the karma. These days, I consult for Hartwell on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. 4 hours each. My rate. My schedule. I do not attend leadership meetings. I do not answer emergency calls after 6. If someone sends me a message that says, "Leonard, can you just take a quick look at something?" I send back the consulting agreement first. Funny thing is, I never stopped loving the actual work. I loved solving problems. I loved clean architecture, reliable systems, teaching younger engineers how to see the weakness before it became a disaster. What I could not tolerate was being treated like furniture. Present, useful, silent, and easy to replace. The difference matters. Marcus is the primary architect now. Sharp, careful, asks the right questions. Before he signed anything, Patricia reviewed every line of his contract. His agreement has a protection clause in it too. Not identical to mine. Better. Because that is what happens when someone who has been through it helps the next person read the fine print before they need it. The story spread faster than I expected. A LinkedIn post from someone in Hartwell's finance department. Then an engineering forum picked it up. A trade publication called it the Leonard Mitchell Clause, which I found equal parts flattering and embarrassing. Mostly because I had spent 3 decades trying to be the person who solved the problem. Not the person the problem was named after. Old engineer protects himself with 1 sentence. Company learns expensive lesson. Consulting offers started arriving. Conference invitations. Some I accepted. Most I declined politely. I was not trying to become a case study. I was trying to retire without having to beg for what I had earned. But if my story reached one person who had been told they were a policy shift, one engineer sitting near a doorway watching other people celebrate their work, one quiet expert about to accept less than they were worth because nobody had told them they were allowed to protect themselves, then the boat and the retirement and the $627,000 were all worth more than the number. People think moments like that feel like victory. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they just feel like relief. I have been doing this for 27 years. I kept the lights on through acquisitions and audits, and Monday morning emergencies that would have taken lesser systems apart. I did it without needing a LinkedIn post or a launch speech. I did it because I believed the work mattered. It still does. I just finally made sure the paperwork said so. The weekend after the money cleared, Emily texted me a photo. She was at her desk with college program brochures spread out in front of her. Engineering. 3 different schools. All of them good. On the corner of the top brochure, in her handwriting, in blue ink. Get it in writing. I stared at that photo longer than I expected. Then I set my phone down, picked up my coffee, and sat with it for a while. 27 years ago, I walked into Hartwell's building as a young engineer who believed that doing good work was enough. I was wrong about that. Good work is necessary, but it is not sufficient. You can be the most capable person in the building, the one keeping everything together behind the scenes, the one everyone calls when something goes wrong, and still be treated like you are optional. If you never put your value somewhere, they cannot ignore it. The system I built is still running. My name is in the documentation now. Emily is going to study engineering, and somewhere in a server room across the city. The platform I spent 3 years building keeps doing exactly what it was designed to do. Because the people responsible for it finally understood that expertise is not an expense you can trim. It is the foundation your entire house is sitting on. The quiet person in the corner might be the only reason the lights stay on. If this story stayed with you, I would love to know in the comments. Tell me, would you have helped them turn the system back on? Or would you have let the board meeting happen without it? And subscribe if you believe the people who hold things together deserve to be treated like they matter before everything falls apart.